Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Ethnically podcast. We're on episode 6, and it's been an amazing journey so far on the Ethnically podcast. I'm joined today by Isabella Mascarenhas. Really honored to have Isabella with us today. And as a bit of an introduction to who Isabella is a people-centered, purpose-driven, innovative leader who has enjoyed a rich and varied career spanning the private, public, and charitable sector, particularly in engineering and technology. She specializes in social impact, youth engagement, development, charity partnerships, and humanitarian aid response, with her work always grounded on a solid foundation of anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, and equity. Her passion and reputation for this work enabled her to rise to Vice President of Education and Social Impact for a global FTSE 100 business. Over the last decade, she has helped organizations to transform their cultures by leading innovations and initiatives from the heart with grassroots change makers. Isabella's work has helped businesses to collectively reach, positive impact, and empower over 750,000 lives around the world. Isabella has done talks all over the world, sharing her unique, thought-provoking insight on how the three elements of social impact, youth engagement, and anti-racism are intrinsically interlinked. And she is also the founder of the IMpact Kinship, which you will talk about more a little bit later. So, Isabella, do you want to say hi to our audience?
Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me, Adarsh.
All right. And it's a really honor to have you as our next guest on the podcast. I know we've spoken briefly offline and got a lot of interesting comments. So it's really, really amazing to have you on the podcast.
Thank you.
Just as an introduction and pretty much my first question, as part of your bio, touched on that you've got a diverse interest in a range of different areas, particularly around social impact. So what kind of inspired you to pursue your career in social impact, and how did that diverse background and those varied interests shape your leadership style?
Really, the big question. So I myself have got quite an interesting background of mixed heritages, and so I'm originally from Southwest India, which is an ex-Portuguese colony, hence my name. My father was born and brought up in Uganda. I spent the first few years of my life in Zambia. And my parents travelled an awful lot with me when I was little, really, really lucky. But I remember distinctly during those travels witnessing all sorts of injustices and disparities around the world. I just remember feeling how unfair some of that was. And then through my personal life, my husband is a Black Jamaican. My children are beautiful, fluffy, mixed-race kids. So yeah, you can see how in those travels, those experiences, my personal life, social justice was always something that I cared deeply about. I've always cared a lot about helping young people to find their direction, their strengths, and where they can flourish in life. Primarily because I don't think I had that when I was growing up. And so I always wanted to be that person that I probably needed when I was young. Nothing untoward about my family. They're a wonderful bunch of people, but traditionally and culturally, it was, you have to do this, this, or this as a profession. And if you don't do those things, then it's not, what's your future going to be? So when I didn't want to be any of those things, I really needed somebody to kind of go, but hang on a minute, you're really good at this, or you've got great people skills, or if you're interested in social justice, here's a career path for you. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of some of the things in my life that kind of brought me to where I am now and why I care so deeply about the thing.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful grounding into like who you are as a person, and sort of, I guess, the foundation for your career and how you've been able to progress. One question I had, because it is quite amazing in terms of those big FTSE 100 companies and how they are so massive and operate on such a large scale.
Yeah.
I guess how do you, in terms of those social impact initiatives that, in terms of D&I, anti-racism, sustainability, how do you impose and bring about change in organizations that are like that massive?
I think it has to start with education. You can't always presume that people know the problems that you're trying to address through those initiatives. So, we had a whole group-wide program that was interlaced with all sorts of communications campaigns, meetings, sessions that people could join, educational sessions. So yeah, I think it's all about educating people and bringing them on a journey to understand, these are the problems that we're trying to address. And most importantly, to enable people to realize how they can play an active part in solving those issues. Because I think as soon as you empower people to realize that they can be a part of the solution to the problem, and that's when they kind of step into their power and go, okay, hang on a minute, this isn't just something being done unto me, it's something that I can actually help to affect as well.
Yeah, I guess what were some of the initiatives that you did sort of lead on, and was there any tension when you first were starting to bring those changes about, not just organization with employees or get perspectives on or challenges that they posed?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that probably almost all social impact people within big companies experience is the impact and the effects of what you're doing can't always be easily quantified with hand signs, right? So you can't always demonstrate how it's benefiting the business. So you have to get quite imaginative about it, whether you look at how many lives you're helping to impact around the world, how many young people you influenced in their education journey. And ultimately, there are then ways of showing how that can then impact your bottom line, right? How it's helping to bring in extra money, which is never the point of why you do it, but it is always a happy byproduct of it. So yeah, I think, initially when I first started there, I was the first person to ever do social impact within the company. So it was very new. But I think slowly over time, people start to realize that, there's a real purpose to doing that work. And to a degree, when you're a big company and you're making that much money, you have to be doing some good in society. You have to be giving back. And particularly when it comes to young people and kids, people generally get all the feels when they see that. So when you're starting out, there might be some questions raised about what are the benefits, but as you're going through the process and people start to see the impact that you're having in people's lives, generally people are very supportive.
You touched on youth empowerment, youth work, youth engagement, and that's obviously a massive part of your work. What, not just in your role, but in general, and the work you're doing now and founding IMpact Kinship. What strategies do you sort of have in terms of like fostering youth empowerment or engage with them? Or because from my own perspective, I think Gen Z, this generation, up and coming, are very proactive. I want to sort of do a lot to change
Absolutely
systemic challenges. So yeah, how do you harness that energy within them, of empower them, but also, I guess, other people that are sort of those millennials and other generations, how do you make them empower young people, support them in that way?
Yeah, okay. But there's a whole range of different things that we do through the IMpact Kinship, but also in my previous role. And I think actually that the most important thing that you can do is to facilitate mechanisms where you can actually listen to the voices of those young people. I'm going to say this out loud, but I think there's a certain arrogance in a lot of senior leaders, not all, but a lot of, in that often they feel that because of their experience and their maturity, that they might know it all. And they really don't, particularly when it comes to this next generation, in terms of things like, the technologies that they use. They're digital natives. They've been brought up with this stuff at their fingertips their entire life. Social media channels, what marketing should people be doing on what channels to reach new audiences. Even diversity and inclusion itself, right? Working with young people, I've learned so much because it is it's a given to you guys. You've grown up in nothing but a diverse society. And so I think putting your ego on a back burner and going, you know what, I don't know everything, and actually this generation can teach me an awful lot of what I don't know, is a great starting point. And then, like I said, making sure that you're creating platforms for those young voices to be heard, actively listening to what they have to say, and then creating initiatives that bring those things to life. So that is actually how we shaped out a lot of the stuff that we do at the IMpact Kinship, but also in my previous role, was all off the backs of what young people had told us they want, not presuming that we know what they want.
I'm asking this question as a young person myself, but also having spoken to other young people and people of this generation. What is it that, like, there's obviously lived experience we have. What else is it that, like, is so, I don't know, it's really interesting because everyone's like, oh, we want to hear young voices, want to hear young voices, want to hear what they want to have to say. But other than lived experience, what else? And I asked not just because I'm wondering, but also I'm interested. Like, what else are the other reasons why you feel like it's important, or like that young people need to be have their voices heard, apart from their lived experience?
Well, I think when you look at from a company's perspective, in the next 3 to 4 years, over 40% of the workplace is going to be Gen Z. That is a huge chunk of your workforce. And if you don't understand their wants, their needs, their expectations, how do you tailor a workplace where they feel like they can belong and actively contribute? So I think, that's a real wake-up call for a lot of companies to get with the program and be like, okay, we really need to understand where our company needs to be going in order to harness the power of these young people. I think also the difference in perspectives that a lot of them bring. I've sat in this interesting kind of position between very senior leadership and working with young people all day, every day. And I can't tell you how much of a void there is between the two. Again, not everybody. There are exceptions to these rules, and there are people who are more open than others. But there's such a different style when it comes to even things like leadership, right? What at the top end of millennials and boomers expect in terms of leadership style versus the type of leadership style that inspires young people. So very different. So we have to bring those three different generations together to listen to each other, to learn from each other. And it's no different to any other form of diversity and inclusion initiative, right? You have to listen to the voices of people with different perspectives or different experiences to you to understand how to include them and make it a workplace that they want to be in.
I think, that touches on sort of the next theme and topic of question that I'm going to ask as well, because I think listening is obviously a massive part of changing the narrative, changing people's understanding of issues, regardless of if it's youth engagement or another form of D&I. In terms of D&I, and when it comes to cultural change and transformational change, there's obviously the listening aspect where you have to dissect and understand the issues. Yeah. How do you take that? And from your experience and the work you've done, how do you take that listening, that those ideas that generated those voices, perspectives, and transform it into meaningful change? What's the transition from that to impact, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think it's super, super important that you don't just listen, because, I have seen organizations that do a lot of listening, but then they don't actually action it into anything meaningful. And that's a really dangerous place to be in, because if people are continuously giving you their feedback and their input and then don't see anything happening with it, people get disillusioned very quickly. So for us, when we listen, we don't just listen, we'll take note. And I'll give you a specific example. So we did a whole bunch of roundtable discussions when we first started the race inclusion work in my previous place. And we invited ethnically diverse colleagues to join that, but also allies. And we posed a few questions. They were all very small, very safe space conversations. And we took anonymized notes from that. And after we did 10 of them, so over 100 colleagues took part in them. And then the race network took the notes away and we went through them and we started to filter them into themes. So what are the common threads that all of these people are telling us? And those actually then formed the pillars of our action plan that we took forward. So yeah, I think it's really important to listen, but also to identify the themes that are coming out and then to build actionable initiatives off the back of those themes. So for us, it was about, attracting, retaining, developing and promoting ethnically diverse talent. There was definitely a piece around education that, people wanted others to understand them better, to understand the cultures that they were coming from. And then there was an element of measurement as well, right? So actually, it's all well and good doing these things, but what change is that bringing about? So making sure that we were keeping a track and measuring the success of some of those initiatives and how they were starting to shape the culture.
Yeah, it's kind of like taking those ideas and perspectives and kind of creating solutions from that, working with the audience or the target demographic that you're looking to sort of bring that change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like they're involved along the journey.
There has to be.
Right. Yeah. Is there any like specific? I know you mentioned an example just then, but is there any specific tensions that come from that you find? I know you kind of touched on it earlier, but because some people are very resistant to change, and that's another massive problem that we're finding in the social impact industry.
Mm-hmm.
How do you personally deal with that as an individual, but also when you're trying to communicate that with the organizations that want to change?
The pushback.
Yeah, the pushback, the difficult conversations.
I mean, the cultural way thinking, for a start, I often see, because what I haven't said is that I also do work through this new IMpact Kinship, I do work with lots of different companies, and I've seen so many companies that are, as soon as there's a difficult conversation or as soon as somebody pops up to say, I'm not happy with this or I'm not comfortable, as opposed to leaning into that and doing something about it, often they're like, oh, no, we can't do this because it's offending people. But everybody's got their own perspective. I don't think there's anything that you're ever going to do where nobody's offended. It's about how you then interact with that person and how you go about making that person feel more comfortable with it. And again, often it's actually making them realize that they can be a part of the solution. We've seen, I think particularly with what's going on in America at the moment and how that whole kind of backlash against D&I is going to start blustering over these ways. You see a lot of people kind of going, well, should we put the brakes on? But it's any which way you cut it, it's the right thing to do. Whether you look at it as a business initiative or not, making people feel comfortable, you get the best out of them. Ultimately, by making people have a sense of belonging, by making people feel comfortable, by making people feel that they're included and that we can talk about issues that they care about, they're more productive, they're happier, you get better returns. Like the business case has been done to death. So I think, there are ways and ways of making people who may not be so comfortable with it, more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
You might not always push them completely over the line of, men. But even if it's just making them realise the little part that they could play and that it gets something being done to them, but something that they can contribute to is really important.
Yeah. I always see it as like because I always think that I personally want more people that want to go through this D&I journey to be outside their comfort zone. Because we are uncomfortable, because that's when you're going to grow and change, right?
Completely. So, yeah.
Like that's from my perspective. Like I understand. Like we need to make people comfortable. I just think there's just I get frustrated when idea, like this idea of discomfort and people wanting to make everyone feel comfortable when you actually need to make some people feel very uncomfortable,
Yeah.
i.e. those that are most, how do we say this nicely? With the most advantage and comfort in society to feel
Yeah.
that discomfort. Because that's
Yeah.
what people from minorities backgrounds and underrepresented groups have felt throughout their lives. So that that does touch onto your point.
A really beautiful thing the other day that I think summed it up really nicely is often when people are uncomfortable with some of this stuff when they have got privileges, making them understand that it's not what you have been through in order to get to where you're at, it's what you haven't had to go through. And I think that's so poignant because no one's saying that you haven't had a hard time. No one's saying that you didn't have your own struggles coming up. But there are some struggles that you might not have ever had to consider. And I think that's a really nice way of framing it.
Yeah, that is really powerful. I guess with D&I, there's so many different aspects. You've obviously got race, you got gender, you got sexuality, you got disability, you got class. So regardless of, I'm a ethnic minority man, but I don't necessarily know the limiting factors that are impacting someone with a disability or someone with different sexuality. So I think that's kind of like another point that I get when it comes to D&I is that I am diverse, but I'm also not diverse because I don't know everything around the different backgrounds and backgrounds of people from all walks of life. And I think that's again another powerful thing. Does that come? You mentioned like America, and you mentioned like global. You work in global at the global scale in different countries of the world. Do you see like difference when it comes to work, D&I work in different areas of the world? Is there like a big difference? Is there what are some of those differences, and what are like key initiatives that you've sort of led on to sort of deal with those?
I mean, there are different approaches to this all over the world. I think the biggest thing that you have to be super mindful of is certain European countries where you legally cannot collect data on diversity and inclusion, which then makes it really difficult to know how you're implementing it and whether it's making a difference. I think that probably for most D&I people would be the thing that they say is the biggest challenge. And then, I think particularly, obviously my particular specialism is race. You have to understand the nuances in a lot of countries when it comes to the topic alone. So for example, looking at it in America, there's a very different history to it in America than there is to say in Britain. And I think history's like really, really, really important to understand when you're doing this work because it still impacts how things are set up today in those respective countries. So yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that you really can do is educate yourself as much as possible on the past and how it's informed the present, and how you can utilize that to build a better future. And that's going to be different from country to country. And it's just part of the work. Right? You can't approach this work with a one size fits all and it's going to work everywhere. You have to understand the nuances and tailor accordingly.
I think it's definitely, I remember when we spoke offline around like our own histories and heritages and how do you find, and it's really, I mean, it's really interesting to how like I'm even in the United Kingdom, like, or how you've met certain people in your lives that have come from all walks of life and have completely different heritages and experiences. How was your own personal experience enforced or shaped how you lead in D&I? Like, do you? Because I feel like it's very powerful. Like, it resonates from how you're speaking, like your own lived experiences and the way you want to shape change.
Yeah.
How was your own heritage? built into that?
Wow. Okay, so I touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the call, but essentially that my own personal journey and lived experience is what brought me to care about this topic so much in the first place. I was always really confused as a kid, if I'm honest, because said, I'm Indian, clearly. I've got this fully Portuguese name, and my entire family have got Portuguese names. We were raised as Catholic. And then, like I said, my father was born and brought up in Uganda, Indian, but born and brought up in Uganda. So having spent the first few years of my life in Zambia, I was like, how did we even end up here? How did my dad, as I got a bit older, all these questions started popping up. How did my dad end up in Uganda? Why did my grandparents go there? And that's when I started getting into history, because that was the only way to understand my family's journey and my roots and the fullness of my heritage. So I started reading like mad, and I learned so much about how our people even came to be there. And I think that there are certain stories that are told more often than others. And I've very rarely heard the story told of the twice removed immigrants, right? So what I learned about my own family's history was that apparently we were originally fish-eating Brahmin Hindus from the north of India. Somehow my family are now pork-eating Catholics in the south of India. Now, something had to go on for us to even have happened. So then reading about the history, I learned that it was actually the Portuguese during their time of colonising India, that they moved our people down from the north to the south to work on particular trades, that they were shipping goods from the southwest coast over to Europe. So that's how we moved there in the first place. And obviously through them, Catholicism was brought to India. And so, that was that little bit of the puzzle kind of made sense. But then I still have that, how did we end up going to Africa? And then I learned that essentially after slavery was abolished, the British and other European countries still needed cheap labour to work on their trades in various colonies. And so they shipped millions of Indians out to, Mauritius, the Caribbean, East Africa. And that's how my family ended up out there. So my grandfather actually went and worked in administration on the railways in Uganda. So all of this stuff just really piqued my interest in all these super personal journeys that very rarely get spoken about or learned, and often intentionally covered up. So we can't learn about them. So that was that aspect of it. And then obviously, my husband, I was brought up in a black country, surrounded by this, phenomenally rich culture and heritage, and then brought to England, where I didn't really feel like I fitted in. And I'd always felt, I hope it's okay to say this, but I've always felt more comfortable in the black community than I have in my own Asian community, because I've faced so much judgment from the Asian community for my affiliation with the black community. And that made me realise how much anti-racism is needed in the South Asian community alone. And then having married a black Jamaican as well. Again, I faced so much judgment from my family, sort of marrying outside of our own race, that this is where all this fuel and passion and fire in my belly comes from for, educating and improving people's outlooks. It's not okay. We're all ultimately people of the global majority, right? It's something that I'm very passionate about saying instead of ethnic minorities, because, ultimately the whole colonialism thing was brought about to divide and rule. So they divided us in as many different ways as they possibly could, so that the cake was easier to eat, if that makes sense. And some of us with our own mindsets of still having prejudices against Black people, for example, we're upholding their work for them. And actually, we're all part of the global majority, and we've all had, to varying degree, with different things done unto our people. And we're much, much, much stronger together. And if we start to dissect that mindset and what brought it about and how we can be more of a collective, collaborative community and how much more we can affect things if we approach it in that way. There's a very long-winded answer, but always a lot of stuff to get in with.
Well, no, that's why there is so much. It's like puzzle upon a puzzle in every sense when it comes to the global majority. So from your story, and I'm really grateful that you shared that. One of the things that really came up for me was like there's obviously racism in wider society, but we also have it I don't say micro racism, but yeah, racism in yeah. Well, like you've got in terms of micro communities, microcosms of society, you have racism within South Asian community, particularly around colorism. There's a massive area on that. You've got it within interfaith marriages, interfaith and the LGBTQ community, and how the South Asian community in particular interacts, and other communities. You've got massive divisions. This is the thing when it comes to D&I, it's so integrated, and it's like you've got so many different aspects of it. So how do you kind of like, but you personally sort of deal with that mentally? But secondly, how do you, because it can be quite draining as well, I guess, at times. How do you mentally deal with that yourselves? And also when you're inspiring other young leaders or leaders in the D&I space, what's your message to them to make sure that they have the power to continue going and to continue pushing the change that they want to see?
Well, there's quite a few questions within there. I think as a starting point, you have to be kind to yourself. Because it's a big thing that you're trying to do, and it's a big thing that you're trying to affect. And you have to be kind to yourself, and you have to realize that you can't always do it all by yourself, and nor should you. You have to involve, as you said earlier, people with lived experiences that you don't have, and you have to be open to listening to that. And it's very much a collaborative thing. And even just through doing it in that way, you kind of share the burden, right? It's not all on you to solve everything. You have people that are willing and super passionate to help with these things. And you have to harness for sure. It's a bit of advice that I was giving to somebody the other day who was she's a Black woman working in D&I. And she was saying, like, I find it a lot. Get therapy. There are things that you should be doing around your own self-care when you're working in such a personal and difficult space as D&I. You have to look after yourself as well. I don't know if that helps.
I think it does, because I think like one thing when it comes to any not just profession, but I guess walk of life, when you're trying to help others, is you kind of need to help yourself along the way.
You have to make sure that you're carving out space and time for yourself so that you can replenish that cup to be able to pour into others.
Metaphor, example, analogy to use, because like, it's you can't help. I always think of when it comes to a plane going down, you have to put your mask on first before you put a mask onto others, an oxygen mask. I always think of that example.
And finding your community as well. Sorry, but I think it's really important. One of the things that has always kept me sane doing this work, particularly around race as a woman of colour, is having your community around you. And people who look and sound like me, who've had similar experiences to me, that you can offload to each other, you can support each other. You can empower each other to realise that you're doing the right thing, even when it sometimes feels a real struggle. Just to uplift each other and be there for each other. It's really important to have those people around you.
No, definitely. I think it's all about, bringing your community along with you whilst you're serving every other community that you want to change and impact and see changes
And
in.
I think there's
You
something
wanna,
else that's important to be said. I think also humility is super important when you're doing this work. As I was saying before, knowing that you don't know everything. One of my favourite lines in one of my favourite Erykah Badu songs is that the man that knows something that knows that he knows nothing at all. And I think it's really important to always bear that in mind, that you cannot possibly know everything that there is to know about the struggles of people living in different identities, different characteristics of diversity and inclusion. You're never going to know them without. And you will make mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes as long as you own them, apologize for them, and do better moving forward. And, that's another thing that I've seen a lot of D&I professionals beat themselves up about is, oh, I messed up on this thing, or, oh, I said this wrong, and then not necessarily knowing how to claw it back. You're just human. You make a mistake, say sorry, learn from it, keep it moving.
yeah, no, 100%, because that's kind of one of the reasons why I sell. Because of course, I want to hear the stories of social impact leaders and people working in D&I spaces and across a range of industries. But I guess it's also for me to I want to learn as well. I don't know everything. There is that humility aspect of I want to learn from different people of different cultures and backgrounds and walks of life, of their struggles and their challenges and their barriers. So it's kind of, and obviously impose, not impose, but share that with listeners and people that engage with the network. Because I think that is important, because it's having that humility. And another point that you raised, which I'm really, really passionate about, is the ideal when it comes to D&I. I feel like my personal experience of working in an organization is that they are obsessed with trying to say the right thing and do this idea of doing the right thing when they're not. Well, they're not always going to get it right, and it's okay to make a mistake. Because I've been in spaces where we're trying to find the right word or the right way of saying things, or you can't say that word, but you got to say this word, or you can't act like this, you got to act like this, and if you do that, it's wrong. But it's just sometimes just a bit too as long as everyone is on the journey of change, wanting to do the right in terms of D&I. I think that's the most important thing. I think this idea of perfection, we're never really going to get it.
And it's all relative, right? Everybody's got their own feelings on what is and isn't okay to say. So you're never going to do things 100% right by everybody. And I think knowing that as a starting point is super helpful.
No, it is. It is. I think in terms of just my next question, and probably one that I think is really, really powerful when we're looking forward, and you mentioned 40% of the workforce will be Gen Z in the next few years. In the next decade, what do you see the biggest changes in D&I? How do you see social impact changing? How do you see the workforce changing, society changing? It's a massive question I know I'm asking you right now. But what, from your perspective, what do you see in the next decade? So being the main things that are going to positively change when it comes to D&I, but what other things that you see still going to be some challenges that we're still facing today?
I think with so many more of these young people joining the workplace who are so deeply passionate about D&I, I think there's going to be a lot of falling out going in. I've seen quite a lot of organisations that do it as a tick box exercise, and they do all the nice stuff. They do all the nice fluffy stuff. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that to sound funny, but they'll do the whole, okay, we'll make our logo rainbow for Pride, or okay, we'll put out a puppy post about Black inventors, the Black History Month, and that's it. I don't think this next generation are going to stand for that. They're going to call these companies out on, well, what are you really doing? What actual meaningful change are you doing? And I'm here for that. I'm going to get my popcorn. I'm going to be in the front row, can't wait. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more pressure on organisations to do things in a much more genuine and authentic way that actually has tangible output, as opposed to on the outside seemingly caring about it, but then not necessarily doing the actual work to make a difference. And I think it's probably the same can be said about social impact. I think there was an amazing piece of research that was done not so long ago by Monster Jobs, and they interviewed tens of thousands of Gen Zers, and found out that I think it was 76% of them said that they cared more about the purpose of an organisation than the paycheck. Like, where do you find purpose in a workplace? 9 times out of 10, it's these things that we're talking about, right? It's how your leaders lead, how your leaders talk, how your leaders create inclusive environments, how you're doing diversity and inclusion, what good you're doing in society. That's the stuff that gives people a sense of purpose, to come to work and know that they're doing something a bit more than just making a company some money. So I think that change in age demographic and the expectations of those young people, I think is going to have a really positive effect on making the steps a bit more tangible.
Yeah, and likewise, I'm going to have my popcorn. Well, I'm obviously going to be sensitive. I'm also going to be having my popcorn, looking at every other Gen Z that's trying to take that change and tackle those barriers.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Actually, it's one that it really made me sit up and pay attention. But immediately after the murder of George Floyd, I was actually one of the most senior people of colour at my previous organisation, and I popped up to the CEO and asked him what we were doing about it. What were we saying? What were we doing to support our colleagues who were clearly hurting at the time? And it took a little bit of guts for me to do that as a senior leader. But on the same day, an 18-year-old white boy apprentice emailed him and asked him exactly the same question. And I was like, wow, he gave 0 beeps about the fact that this was the CEO. He was like, care about this. This is a big deal. It's happening around the world. These BLM marches are going all over the place. We've got a lot of black colleagues. What are we doing to help them? That's the kind of energy that these guys are going to be bringing. And I think that we really need to flex how we're doing things so that we don't have to scurry to keep up at the last minute.
Yeah, I think as well, like a big theme from what I've noticed in Gen Z and my own generation and younger people in general is the sense of allyship. So, for example, that case you just gave of the white male apprentice in that organization, like he is an ally of the black community, of every community, because he's standing up to those issues and directly confronting the CEO and saying, "Look, what are we doing about this?" That's a big thing, and I think that is another thing that I'm really looking forward to when you say like the Gen Z workforce is going to be coming center stage. It's that sense of allyship. Like, we'll not leave one person behind if there's an issue that we feel is impacting someone that we know, we love, or care about. We're going to tackle that as well. It's not just the one that directly impact us. So that's what I think. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to, like, because there's a lot of doom and gloom around like the world at the moment. But I think when it comes to the workforce, I think it will be, like you said, like it will be really interesting to see those changes that come from.
Do you know, I have to say on that, I know it's a lot of pressure to put on young shoulders, but that's one of the things that gives me so much hope for the future. It's actually just the fire and energy and passion and sense of justice that so many young people have. I think there's going to be a lot of positive changes around by you guys.
No, definitely. And it's going to be interesting. As it comes towards the end, I have this segment in each of my podcast episodes where the previous guest of the last Ethnically podcast asked a question to the next guest. So you have a question. I don't think I thought about this.
That takes it away.
You have an interesting question, and yes, you kind of touched on it earlier when you were speaking about the South Asian community. So the previous guest his name was Rohit Sugu, and he is director of British Sikh
Absolutely.
Nurses, and he works with children and young people in nursing, and he's done a lot of teaching in their higher education. In that episode, we were talking a lot around the South Asian community and the stigmas that exist in the community. And his question was really interesting. He was talking about that South Asian Heritage Month coming up, and one of the themes, or the main theme, I think, is free to be me. Oh, so okay, so that's good. So because I didn't know about free to be me and the South Asian Heritage Month, so I asked him to provide some context for me on the episode, and I was going to use that to provide context if you didn't know. It seems like and his question was, what does free to be me mean to you? And what does that mean for the South Asian community? How do you want the South Asian community to feel when they hear that message? And yeah, what does that mean to you?
Man, you had to leave such a loaded question to the last minute. And it's funny that you should ask that question, because I've actually been talking to a few friends of mine about that theme recently, and I don't know how to say it, Adarsh, but I don't know how I feel about it. Because, I've touched on it in various little bits and pieces that I've spoken about, but I don't know how many people in the South Asian community actually feel free to be themselves. Can we try and quantify that? So, me personally, I've never really felt accepted by the South Asian community. I think you and I talked a little bit about this when we spoke. So I've never lived in India. I don't speak any of the languages. My dad spoke Swahili, my mum spoke Hindi, and so at home they spoke English, and that's the only language I was raised knowing. I am not of a religion that is one of the majority religions in South Asia. And then I grew up in Zambia, and so I've never really felt particularly free to be me. And I know quite a lot of people that feel the same, particularly if they harbour beliefs or value systems that don't necessarily fit with what's acceptable in our communities. So, in a way, I guess you could bring it back round to a positive, that it's actually an opportunity to talk about all of those things that often don't get spoken about. So that's the power that I do see in the theme. But I think it's a very interesting thing that should hopefully elicit some really juicy conversations.
I'm hoping so too. I think it's needed. I think it'll be a turning point for a lot of the conversations, not just in those communities, but in general around, what it means to be free to be me. What does that mean? Because I think you touched on it. I did think a lot of people in the South Asian community are feeling that. Like what does freedom mean to me?
That's a really interesting kind of addition to the question. You might feel free to be you in certain circumstances, in certain environments, but in others, you might feel the complete opposite.
Definitely, yeah.
Who are we being free with? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Maybe that can be your question. I was going to say, so now it is your opportunity to ask a question to the next guest.
Do I get any clues about any of the next guest is?
I want to be fair to everyone. I'm not really giving anyone any clues, so I'm going to stick to that. I'm like, it can be a question of anything related to D&I, the themes of ethnically, whether we're talking about youth engagement, Gen Z, race, diversity, inclusion, empowerment, leadership, any of the broad themes. Do you have an interesting? I like spicy questions like what Rohit provided you. So if any question that you want to give to the next guest.
Okay, I'm thinking I might give a question that's kind of directly related to what we're looking at doing with the IMpact Kinship. So something along the lines of why is deep knowledge of anti-racism and D&I so necessary when we're doing charitable work or work with marginalised groups of people through social impact? Is that pointy enough for you?
That is very pointy. That's good. That's the perfect level of pointing. I think that's a powerful question, a really good question to end the next episode on. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the answer the next guest has for that question
as well, because I now have to tune in to that next episode. What about person?
Yeah.
Very cunning, very good.
I thought of it as cunning. I thought of it as like more me being able to get another question because I don't have to do all the thinking of all the questions. But actually, that is cunning. Right?
Yeah, I totally meant it. That is good.
Okay, maybe it's a compliment. I like that. Yeah. Sometimes you need to be cunning.
Little beckons on my next step.
Yeah, it's a little marketing ploy that I developed. But yeah, that does bring us to the end of today's episode. Isabella, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to speak with you, and I just want to thank you for being as honest, vulnerable, and powerful as you've been, because I think you shared some really interesting and necessary stories, and you've said it how it is, and you've not sugarcoated anything. I think that's something I really value when I speak to my guests on the podcast. And yeah, I hope listeners have really enjoyed and enjoy listening, but I've got a lot out what you've had to say.
And I think you for doing what you do. I think it's so important. And it's been an honor and a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing with Ethnically. I think it's a great platform to have lots of different voices and perspectives heard and listened to, and hopefully people can do something tangible with what they learn from people that you've interviewed.
No, definitely. I really hope so as well. Yeah, no, it's been an absolute pleasure.